My guest today shared that if you would have told her that she was going to become a registered behavioral technician, she would have said, no way. And that was because a lot of the information that she was consuming on social media. But things happened and she became a registered behavioral technician. I had a wonderful conversation today with Jackie Jung. She is a first-year graduate student at Midwestern University pursuing speech-language pathology with a desire to specialize in AAC, but she started her journey in the field as a registered behavioral technician. So today in this episode, you are going to learn all about that journey. What is an RBT? How do people become RBTs? There are over 200,000 people who have a certification as an RBT, Registered Behavioral Technician. You're going to learn about that journey and how she decided that she wanted to become a speech language pathologist. She said, I place great value on progressive applied behavior analysis. I value treatment that is rooted in connection, assent, natural environment teaching, and client interests. This is such a great episode. I can't wait for you to listen to this conversation with Jackie. We are trying to really support everybody here in the ABA Speech Connection who has an RBT certification. In 2026, RBTs are going to have to get CEUs per the BCBA rules, and all this information just came out. Here in the ABA Speech Connection, we have an RBT tier for CEUs where you can save money if you are purchasing your CEUs or if your company is purchasing your CEUs. We have already started to create RBT focused courses in the ABA Speech Connection, and we have more coming out soon about joint attention, about AAC, about information that is going to help you obtain these needed CEUs and do so in a way that is going to help you learn skills to feel more confident in your sessions. Let's get into this conversation with Jackie. I'm Rose Griffin, a speech therapist, board-certified behavior analyst, and founder of ABA Speech. It wasn't all that long ago that I felt overwhelmed by providing therapy for my autistic students and any students who were not yet speaking. Fast forward through many doubts, tears, research, and courses, and you will see the framework that I use today and share with over 60,000 readers weekly. One that will help you support your students and feel more confident in the process. I created the ABA Speech podcast to give you simple, step-by-step strategies to help you reach all of your students wherever they are on their communication journeys. If you're a speech therapist, BCBA, RBT student, or parent who's looking to help all students develop a way to communicate with the world, you are in the right place, friend. Let's get started. Thank you, Jackie, so much for coming on the show. I'm excited to talk with you today.
I'm so excited to speak with you too. You are such a role model for me. You combine the two worlds that I love professionally.
Yay. And we connected on LinkedIn. I do talk about LinkedIn quite a bit here on the podcast because I've connected with so many amazing people on LinkedIn, and I feel like it's just the best social media out there if you want to make connections. So I think we just connected. Maybe you answered a poll, or I clicked on your profile. I saw that you were going to school to become an SLP and that you had been an RBT before. And we haven't really talked about being an RBT or just kind of your career trajectory, which I think is really interesting. So you shared that you were an RBT for 3 years. Can you share how you knew you wanted to do that work, kind of how you got into it? And for those listening that don't know what RBT means, it's registered behavioral technician. So there are a course we were just talking about, a 40-hour course and different competencies that you have to take. It's a certification that falls under the BCBA, and it is somebody who works one-on-one with students. And I've been in the field so long that certification didn't even exist when I became a BCBA. And now there are over 200,000 people who have received the RBT certification, which is a wild number. And in 2026, RBTs are going to need to get CEUs. So that's something that we've been trying to do at the ABA Speech Connection, is having RBT focused courses before that date rolls around, because it's coming up quickly. And the BCBA just came out and said that a BCBA and an RBT cannot take the same course and both get CEUs for it, which makes me really sad because I talk about collaboration a lot. So I think that kind of goes against the efforts of us all learning together. But that's another podcast episode. So tell us, how did you get into wanting to be an RBT?
My pathway is really interesting because if you had told me I was going to be an RBT maybe a year before I started, I would have said, absolutely not. There's no way. Because especially like being on that speech pathway and being on social media, the stigma around ABA is vast. It's very negative. You know, you see a lot of people saying ABA is abuse. You should never put your kid in ABA. I don't want to collaborate with ABA professionals. And so I did have that sort of bias. But everything kind of lined up in a weirdly perfect way for me professionally. So I was obtaining my associate's degree online and I worked as a full-time nanny for an 8-month-old boy. And then as he got older, he got diagnosed with a speech delay and he was in early intervention and then eventually got an early diagnosis for ASD. And so I got to kind of watch that parental perspective of obtaining those diagnoses and the grieving process and all of that. And that was very special to be a part of. And then I was with the family for 2 years. And when it was time for me to part with them because they were moving and I was starting my undergraduate program, Mom was like, I really think you need to be an RBT. I think you'd love it. I think you'd be so good at it. And I was so hesitant because of what I said again about that stigma.
Right.
And she explained, you know, it's not like that everywhere anymore. There's surely places that are very traditional still, but there's a lot of progressive practices. And once I interviewed with a company, I didn't really look back and I loved it more than I could have ever imagined.
Oh, I love that you're sharing that journey because I think that's what feels so upsetting to me. And I'll tell you what, I made a post last week on Instagram and it was true. It was not rage bait, as somebody had said on Reddit. I put a post and said a speech therapist in a Facebook group said that they were going to put on their resume that they would not see any clients who also get ABA. And I put that on Instagram and people really, I'm still getting comments on it. People were really upset about it. It's upsetting to think that somebody would not get their child services or just try to see if ABA is right for their kid because of an Instagram influencer, which feels so yucky. And people were so upset about that. Actually made it all the way to Reddit. And nobody said anything mean about me personally, which I thought was a win because I've been on social media a long time and people are super nasty. But it was obviously people feeling a certain way about that. And I think it's great that you're sharing, you know, that you're like, this is kind of how I felt. And because you were seeing this content, but then when you actually did it in real life, it felt like a good fit for you. So I love that. Thanks for sharing that. Because I think there's probably a lot of people that are feeling the same way, and they might have an idea of what something is because they've seen people talk about it. So that's powerful to share. What was the process like to get certified as an RBT? What did that look like? What do you need? I mean, I've read it on paper, but I was not an RBT first. So like, what is the process to get certified as an RBT?
Yeah, so the process to get certified looks like you would get your 40 hours recommended by whatever company you're, you know, signing with or working with. So in my case, I took a free 40-hour course online called or by the Autism Partnership Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that one was free. A lot of companies will cover your costs if it is one that I'm losing my words. If it is one that costs money, but you take the 40-hour course and then you can take that before you start your role or kind of as you're starting your role. A lot of companies want you to become an RBT within a certain amount of days. So you take the 40 hours and I can't remember if you take your competency assessment before or after testing, but you take a test and then you take a competency exam, which just kind of shows that you can apply those skills with a client for the most part. I found it to be really straightforward, but I do
Hmm.
test well, to be fair. I
Yeah.
had some coworkers say that it took them multiple times to take the test, but overall, I would say that if you study for the exam, you're going to pass.
So okay, so you take the 40-hour training and then do you go to a testing center? I'm sorry, this may sound really dumb. I don't know how this all works. So I really want to understand it because we try to offer courses now for RBTs and I really want to understand the process. So are you going to a testing center, like a Pearson testing center to take the test?
Yes, exactly. You go to a
Okay.
Pearson testing center, you
Okay.
walk through all your things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Trauma. I remember. I taken the BCBA exam and all the speech stuff, all the things, you have in your future, but I did it. I'm so much older than you. Okay, so you take the test just like we would take in a Pearson testing center, which a lot of professionals are going to be familiar with that. And then the competency is that somebody at your workplace who is saying like, I'm administering this competency, and then that's you in real life showing you can demonstrate certain skills. Is that correct to say?
Yeah, that's correct. It's like a sheet that they fill out, and you can review it beforehand too to kind of study what you should be expected to know. And there has to be a certain percentage that you demonstrate with a client versus like some of it is situational. So the BCBA can say, what would you do in this situation?
Okay.
But that's kind of
Interesting.
how it works. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Let me ask one more question about that. So what did you do to get ready for the RBT exam? Does the place that offered the 40-hour training, did they have like a get ready for the test, or is that something that you just studied what you had gone over? I'm just curious what the process is for getting ready to take a test like that.
I'm not sure if they had some sort of test prep. They might have.
Yeah.
But what I used to study was kind of just the notes I had taken. A lot of people make Quizlets actually for the RBT exam.
Oh,
There's a ton out there. And
I
then
saw
I
it
can't
too.
remember the name of the person, but on YouTube, there's different creators too that kind of do like RBT test prep. That was super helpful.
Okay. That's good to know. I haven't looked into that. That's great. Yeah, we want to offer more things for RBTs with how many people are RBTs and how many people are going to have to get CEUs and just being ready for that role. So that's all new to me. Thank you for sharing. If there was one thing you would want to include or modify about the RBT training, what would that be? If there was something that I have some ideas on what I think they could, have more of, and I actually just did a poll on LinkedIn yesterday. But what do you think might be nice to include that maybe wasn't included in the 40 hours that you took?
It has been so long ago since I took the course, so I don't want to. I might be wrong in saying that these topics weren't covered, but maybe not as much in not as much detail. I would
Mhm.
say it's really important to cover play skills if you're working in a pediatric setting, which a lot of people are,
Yeah.
because that doesn't come naturally to everyone. And I do think that that can be taught better when you're doing in-person training as well, but I think it's still nice to cover. And then de-escalation skills, because not every company is going to have you take, QBS, CPI, some sort of safety care training.
Yeah, and you want to feel prepared for those types of situations. I've seen play. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was looking into the RBT training. It looks like, there's so many hours you have to cover, and then you have like these 2 hours. And I was like, oh, I can think of so many communication-based things like AAC or sign language or play. Like that's one I see in Facebook groups a lot. Like, how can we expand people's ability to play? And what's so interesting about that is all those more naturalistic things, you think they would be like easy, but it's actually more nuanced and it's more of an art form. To me, it's like a therapy session. Once you get rocking and rolling and you'll be ready for therapy. When I was doing my first therapy sessions, I had no experience, before I did my first therapy session. And so I was really going in cold, but you've been working with kids, so you'll be like ready to go and do all the things. So that's exciting. But I think those are two good ideas and things that people talk about. So what are your thoughts on, we had kind of talked about it before I had pressed record. What are your thoughts on the CEU requirement for RBTs starting in 2026? So in 2026, RBTs will need 12 CEUs per 2-year interval. What are your thoughts on that?
I have a few thoughts on it. My first thought is I sure hope that companies are going to pay for these courses for their clinicians,
Right.
because I can't imagine paying for that on an RBT wage.
Yep.
And then I also hope that RBTs will see an increase in wages because I do believe that quality RBTs are severely underpaid for the work that they do. With that being said, I think it's great. I think it's been long overdue that RBTs have this sort of continuing education to expand their knowledge. I think that anyone in a helping field should be, contacting new information, evidence-based practices, because things change. And like I said, I can hardly remember my 40-hour training from 3 years ago.
Right. Right.
Refreshers would be so nice.
Yes.
Getting that new information. So I think it's great. I think it might result in seeing some like a bigger RBT shortage than we already have because some people might be deterred by that extra workload, but hopefully it will result in stronger RBTs.
Yeah, I think people just have to incorporate into what they're providing. I know a lot of ABA providers, not so much speech. This is not the case for speech usually, but a lot of ABA providers do usually either do in-house CEUs or they join, our membership, the ABA Speech Connection, or they offer people a stipend. So we have a lot of BCBAs who, and I would imagine RBTs eventually, who have a stipend and they can use that, which is nice. You don't see that as much for speech therapy. And that's hard because you have to get your own CEUs. So you are in school to become an SLP, which is very exciting. How did you know that you wanted to go into the field, that you wanted to be a speech therapist?
It's a loaded question because, like I was saying earlier, I feel like everything kind of fell into place for me professionally. I had a really great mentor in high school that saw my love for working with children and that I wanted to do a little bit more than just teaching or like preschool education is what I was thinking at the time, but it didn't feel right. And she told me to look into speech therapy, but warned me it's super competitive for school. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not a competitive girl for school. That's super intimidating. Um, but she set me up with some sessions to observe and I just loved it. And then with my nanny experience and becoming an RBT, it really formed kind of my solid understanding that this is what I want to do and also kind of pushed me into like where I want to specialize.
Oh, that's great. So do you think that you want to specialize in autism or what, do you have an idea of a specialty or is it pediatric? I mean, I'm just assuming because of your experience, but I don't know. When I went to graduate school, when I first got out, I guess after my CFY year, I did work in a nursing home I did some PRN and I liked it kind of. I don't know. But then I started to specialize in autism and I never looked back. But what are you thinking for that?
Yeah, so I want to specialize in working with autistic individuals and or AAC users. I like I mean, they do overlap a lot, but I like the idea of working with, AAC users that maybe don't have able bodies, different access, eye gaze and stuff is really interesting to me, but I do need to gain more experience with that. And then I do feel like my heart is tied to pediatrics, but I'm trying to go in with an open mind because after externships, who knows where I could be swayed.
That's right. I mean, so have you thought about like where you might want to work for your CFY year? So CFY year, if you're listening as a BCBA, stands for clinical fellowship year. So you are paid your normal starting salary, but you do have a supervisor that has to provide a minimal amount of supervision support per ASHA, which is our governing body. And so some people have great supervisors, some people's are more hands off, but have you thought about like, do you want to do schools? Do you want to do clinic? Have you thought about what might be a good fit for you?
Yeah, I think when I imagine myself, I think of like somewhere outpatient, pediatric, like a clinic setting. Ideally, I'd love to be somewhere that's super play-based, naturalistic, and de-affirming. But again, I feel like I could be swayed. I know that obtaining your CFY hours at a school can be better because the hours are a little bit more consistent too. So that's something I have to look into more.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I did, I always kind of divided my time. I did do my CFY in a public school. And then I was public school for a while. And then I got a job at the Cleveland Clinic, which now is called a learner school, but it is a non-public program. That's what I say on Instagram. It's an ABA program. And so but it started a really long time ago. So I mean, maybe 2006. So it was like one of the first, like before ABA was covered by insurance. And so people would come from all over the United States to like go to this school and observe what we were doing in the school. And so I was a speech therapist there, and that kind of lit a fire in me to help students like that. And so that's when I started to really specialize in helping kids who were not yet speaking, kids who engaged in unsafe problem behavior that was a barrier to their learning. So then I always kind of divided my time clinically between schools and programs like that. But I think with, and what I had found was like when you say that you love working with autistic students and you love, trying to help students who have behavioral barriers, that quickly became my entire caseload because a lot of people don't feel competent with that type of learner, but that is the type of learner that I felt really driven to help. So and that's where I got immersed in AAC. Like I remember the first program where I worked with AAC. We had an SLPA who was really proficient in LAMP. Yeah, LAMP vocabulary from Frankie Romick. And I had no idea. I had only seen Dynavox, like that type of vocabulary. And it was just so different to me that I just was like, you do the AAC stuff until like I finally had time. And then I really dug into the device and I was like, okay, I'm not scared of this anymore. I think that's a big part of AAC is that people are nervous about the buttons and like what's in there. And how many buttons do we start with? Like these are all questions that I talk about with speech therapists and BCBAs because there's not exactly a complete rule book on how to do it. And some people think, oh, let's start with 80 buttons and they need everything. And then other people think, well, let's systematically start with 4 and then we get more. And it's very complicated. So I think if you did AAC, people would appreciate that because people are afraid of AAC. Have you worked with anybody who uses AAC? Well, probably as an RBT, maybe you did.
Yeah, so I would say over 50% of my caseload throughout the years was AAC users, mostly high tech, some low tech. I have a preference for high tech just because it is more robust. And I think, core boards and PECs can be very limiting and frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We're actually, by the time this airs, we're coming out with an offer that will be our intro to AAC course, which is really just an introduction to AAC for speech therapists and BCBAs. And then I've developed an AAC goal bank just to give people some ideas about goal setting because it seems like that is an area of need. And then some digital resources that people can use. So I hope people like that because I think that you just have to kind of get into AAC. And that's the way that I felt more comfortable to say like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's in this device. I'm scared. But then after a while, I was like, okay, I gotta learn this. And funny enough, Jackie, I took an AAC class in my graduate coursework and I didn't learn anything in that class. I really was not the best class for me. It just wasn't like a great class. And so when I got into the world, I didn't know much about AAC until I really got into it. And I think that's something that BCBAs don't understand is that just because you're a speech language pathologist doesn't mean you're an expert in AAC. If you're somebody that worked in a nursing home and was all medical or you just worked in outpatient RTIC therapy and then you get transferred to the schools with autism classrooms, people will be like, well, that SLP didn't know, about the AAC device. It's like, well, we have a big scope of practice. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to know everything. So that kind of irks me. Sometimes you have to defend the speech therapist against others.
A lot of people are really intimidated by AAC, and I think that can be very limiting because the best thing you can do for your clients is engage with it, even if it means learning in front of them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, learning in front of them. I love that. So what is, kind of to round out our episode today, what is one piece of advice that you give someone who's thinking of working in the field of ABA or speech therapy, or if you have different advice for each person? But what are some lasting things, just as like your lived experience, what is helpful?
Mhm. I think the number one thing I would tell anyone in either professions is put your pride aside. It can be very hard to do, but I think that what limits really quality care and quality collaboration is people hold on to kind of their pride and their ego and they're defensive with feedback. And I think that the number one thing you need to do for your clients is take feedback and continuously learn and grow. Because at the end of the day, whether you're treating, on your own or on a team, you should have the client's best interest at heart.
I love that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to connect.
Yeah, it was so good speaking with you.